So I'm continuing on the theme of gratitude this week, or at least these last few days, as I've been trying to understand it more, practice it more, etc. And, if you get a sense, if you watch any of these videos, I tend to like to know why and explanations and the mechanics behind things. And gratitude falls squarely into that category. And I spent a video recently where I talked about what I thought was the logic behind the impact that gratitude has. But there was one particular concept around that I've been thinking about that I wanted to expand on a little bit. And it's based on the premise, as I talked about before, that we have this kind of gauge or this meter in us, which is constantly monitoring our overall pleasure versus discomfort. And there's all sorts of implications to that. I've talked about the subconscious mind and how that's kind of its main function is to optimize for that gauge and protect us from going too far towards discomfort. And I've talked about how gratitude, I think, helps improve the ratio of that gauge, right? And that's part of the benefit that it has. And when that gauge is set towards more pleasure than discomfort, that's what allows us to make better decisions, to very literally take on more discomfort in the short term so that we can get more long-term gain. So, for example, if that gauge is really high, right, we're having a great day, a great week, everything seems to be going our way, we got promoted at work, our kid's doing well at school, all sorts of things, right? If somebody comes to you and says, hey, you want to go for a 3-mile run? You're much more likely to be like, yeah, hell yeah, let's go do it. I want to go for a run right now. Versus if you're having a shit week and everything's going bad and work is a mess and your kid's getting in trouble at school and somebody comes to you and says, hey, you want to go for a run? Much more likely to say no in that scenario, right? So that gauge matters. It impacts our day-to-day life. So I say all that because, as I said, I think gratitude has an impact on that gauge, but the way in which it does, the reason in which it does, I think is important to note. Because somebody might say, well, okay, if that gauge is really what's at the core of this, it's less about gratitude. Gratitude is just a mechanism. Then let's focus on the gauge. Let's try and just convince ourselves that gauge or genuinely make that gauge better, right? Raise the pleasure, reduce the discomfort. And you might say things like, well, let me just say kind of positive affirmations or just think positive thoughts or try and be positive and try and see the glass half full in all these different situations, right? And you could see somebody maybe making the argument that you could do it somewhat superficially. Just convince yourself, convince your mind, brainwash your mind, trick your mind, whatever the thing is, right? That things are good and you should get the same result as you get from gratitude. But I don't believe that holds. I believe there is something unique about gratitude and the way in which it functions, which makes it drive up the pleasure meter in that gauge so much higher than other things. And the nature of that is that I feel like it is so complete and comprehensive in what it does, right? So if you think about it, it's about pleasure. It's about, and I mean that not in like the hedonistic sense, although that could be it. It's more just the generic sense of we want pleasure, we want positive in our lives. Gratitude, true gratitude, almost forces that to be real and to be recognized and to be valued in that equation, right? For you to be truly grateful for something, you have to look at it and say, this thing is good and brings positive to me in my life. Therefore, I am thankful for it. Versus just trying to be positive, right? Just trying to smile, right? You'll hear people say it sometimes. If you just smile, it makes you happier. And I'm sure there's some science behind that and that works, right? Or think positive thoughts, right? In general, I'm just going to think about good things. I'm just going to think about, I'm going on a trip next week or whatever, and all these good things. But it's not the same. It's not the same as being thankful or being grateful, because being thankful or being grateful, if you think about it in mathematical terms, it's the proof of the equation. It's the proof that value is legitimate and real, which I believe our mind digests, if you will, much better. The benefit we get from it is much stronger than just a positive thought. Again, because the equation is being proved. For me to be genuinely thankful for my family, for my wife, for my son, for my job, for all sorts of different things, it means that I've gone through the mental exercise and the mental calculation, if you will, figuratively, to think about the net impact of that thing. Is it net positive or is it net negative? And I've come out to, hey, this is a positive. I am grateful for this. This brings pleasure. This brings positive into my life. therefore I am grateful. Almost from a logical mathematical perspective, you can't be grateful for something unless there's something positive that comes from it. And that's what gratitude forces us to do. It forces us to recognize and acknowledge and value the positive things we have in our lives. And in most cases, it forces us to do it for things that maybe we take for granted or we don't think about that much, and we're not appreciating the positive of that, the value, the pleasure that it brings enough. And it forces us to do that, right? Because when we're genuinely grateful, that happens. In best case, it takes a negative and makes it a positive, right? It takes a negative thing and finds positive in it, which is like a double benefit because now you're removing some of the discomfort and you're replacing it with pleasure. So you think about that meter, and that's like a whew, that sends that thing up. And that's what you want. And I think when you hear people talk about the benefits they get from gratitude and how much of an impact it's had on their life and their well-being and how they think and their ability to think more long-term and make better decisions and all that stuff, I think this gets to a lot of it, right? So it's very much in line with what I talked in the previous video. It's about that pleasure versus discomfort gauge. And gratitude helps to boost that. But this idea of it being kind of a proof point for the equation, it allows us to pull more value or benefit out of it, so that when we put it into the into that gauge, it increases almost exponentially, right? Greater than it should, the pleasure we get, because it's not that we're just trying to believe something positive; it's that we've actually proved it to some way extent to ourselves, right? If we're actually thankful, we've taken that next step, right? It's more than just a positive belief; it's another step to say, I genuinely know this thing is bringing pleasure or positive to my life.